I'd like to get started with, we got a couple of lunchtime presentations that we're going to have. So go ahead and continue eating, finish up eating, but we're going to have, first I want to welcome Hank Love. He's with the Executive Director of the American Jobs Project. And we were lucky enough here at the Center for Energy and Sustainable Development, we were served as sort of advisors for this project. They did a study on West Virginia jobs and opportunities in industrial energy efficiency in general. And so Hank is the executive director of this program. They've done a number of these studies around the country, and we were lucky enough to be able to partner with them on the study that they did in West Virginia. And Hank's here to tell us about that. So I turn it over to Hank Love.
If I can use this properly. All right, so thanks, Jamie. As you said, my name is Hank Love, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Jobs Project. We do state-level economic development strategies on specific advanced energy technologies. I need to be closer? All right. This is too low for me. As Jamie said, he was our partner in this state, and so far, no? There we go. We've actually been going across the U.S. and working with states to identify specific technologies that they can have a comparative advantage in and create jobs based on their legacy industries, natural resources, and other strengths that they might have. So we've done 16 state reports so far, including West Virginia, and we're doing 6 state reports right now in places like Wyoming and Louisiana and New Mexico. And we partner with an academic institution in every state to try and make sure we have a local partner that can tell us what would work and what wouldn't fly in any of our states. And when we first reached out to some contacts at West Virginia University before we actually got introduced to Jamie, one of the responses was, I don't want to discourage you necessarily, but don't come here. West Virginia doesn't want a group from Berkeley, California telling them what to do with their economy. And I was not surprised by that at all. So this is how we're kind of different. Our only agenda when we come to a state is that we want to help them create jobs in an advanced energy industry. We don't come with any idea of what that will be. We work with people on the ground to help them. They decide, and then we go do research on their behalf. And then once we do our research, we take the ideas we've come up with and we run it by them to make sure it's actually viable strategies that would be supported. So we're not coming to West Virginia and saying, like, you need to mandate renewable energy or anything like that. Mandates aren't going to fly in this state. I know that. So, as I said, once we explained how we did our work, the person we contacted said, you've got the right idea. You need to listen to us and don't tell us what to do, and actually put us in contact with Jamie. So these are just some of the groups that we worked with in our research to try and understand where the opportunities were, as well as what kind of strategies would be supported in the state. So we have kind of a holistic view of how to do economic development. We try and find a specific industry, and we try and find strategies to fill in their value chain and align industry with workforce development, innovation and commercialization of technology, and getting access to investor capital, working capital, grants, loans, other forms of non-dilutive capital. First we kind of map all the assets that exist in the state, what they have that's working, what could be replicated and spread throughout the state, and then where there are gaps and barriers that need to be surmounted. And we look in other places that the state can relate to. We're not going to come and say, hey, they do this in California, you should do it in West Virginia. That's you can't say it to almost any state, because they'll always tell you, like, we're not California, we're not going to do that. You have to find a neighbor or a state that has a similar type of economy to really have a relational aspect in policy, because that helps people see that they can actually implement something like that and have it be a successful strategy for them. So, as I said, we look at things like policy certainty. So, providing clear market signals to make it safe to make investments and really plan in the long term and reduce risk. This is an example when the Empire State Building was built. It took 13 and a half months to do it. Can you imagine a building that size being built in 13 and a half months today? Not a chance. Maybe in China. I think they can do it in 18 weeks in China. And the Cape Wind Farm, that's taken 10 plus years to complete. I was just in Wyoming. They're trying to build a transmission line from Wyoming to Nevada. It's taken 10 years and $100 million to just get through the permitting process. So there's always a lot of hurdles when you're doing economic development, and the more you can clear the way for businesses to operate and make sure they have a safe environment and know they're not going to get tangled up in bureaucracy or and things like that, it's going to help drive more investment. So one of the things we suggested to drive jobs in industrial energy efficiency were tax incentives and rebates. Currently in the state energy plan, which I hope all of you will go and look at the state energy plan and comment. You have to comment by the 31st of this month. They have a manufacturing investment tax credit. Right now there currently is a manufacturing investment tax credit. It's at 5%. They want to increase it to 10 or 20%. And that will incentivize industrial businesses to spend money on energy efficiency improvements and get a tax incentive in return. And that's a big incentive for companies to do that because they lower their operating costs and they get a tax benefit on the side of that. So it can really drive a lot of investment. So another thing I talked about is value chain development. I think Sam, wherever he might be, was talking about this at the Governor's Energy Summit earlier this week. When you can fill in your supply chain and capture more of the market, you're going to create more jobs, more of a diversity of jobs. You can create job transferability, which means you can, if you lose your job in one place, you can go over and find a job in a similar business close by. You don't have to move halfway across the country. In Silicon Valley, you lose your job at Facebook, you just go work at Google or Twitter or something like that. Maybe not Twitter now, but so that can really help keep people retained in the region because you don't have migration of the workforce to go find jobs when they lose it in one place. And so one of the suggestions that we had was to create an anchor company tax credit. This means that you take your existing industry and say, how can we help you identify companies that are your suppliers and attract them to come to the state, and we'll give you a tax incentive for it. We'll also give that company an incentive for it so we can build more of the supply chain and the value chain in the state and maximize the job creation that can come from it. Also, just a best practice is going on doing foreign direct investment missions to try and attract foreign companies to make investments and try and find ways to really streamline processes to say, if you bring your business here, we'll make sure that we get your buildings in place, or we have idle factory space that you can fill, and give them incentives to bring their businesses there and hire local workers. All right, so innovation. You guys have some great innovation assets in West Virginia. I mean, with West Virginia University, National Energy Technology Laboratory, and Marshall, you really need to find ways to take good research at the universities and get commercialization pipelines by fostering startups and giving them access to capital, which I'll talk about in a minute. But give them an environment where they can feel supported, grow their businesses, find customers, prove out their technologies, and get them into the market. Energy technology is typically a very long timeline to commercialize anything, but industrial energy efficiency technologies, motors, drives, pumps, compressors, insulation, things like that, those can be commercialized pretty quickly. So it's, I remember is it the president or the vice president of the university was at the Governor's Energy Summit? He said, of West Virginia University, he said that the university's been trying very hard to do a lot to assist with commercialization, and also they're trying to set up a very large venture fund to try and get more investment into local companies, which is great. So that's, as I was saying, streamline commercialization from universities to labs. I think it's a pretty good example of this. It's like MIT can commercialize in like under a year. They can take something, their intellectual property, and get it commercialized in under a year. And at a place like, was it North Carolina, UNC, it can take like 3 years or more. Who's got the patience or the time to wait 3 years to take something that's in the lab by then? It's not worth anybody's time. So it's really, if you can accelerate that timeline and give people places to start their businesses, get access to services. If you've got people who have innovation and they might not have the business side figured out, partner them up with your business school or create projects to help people do studies on finding first customers or different business models that they could operate in. Another strategy here, and I know West Virginia University actually has a foundation liaison, but there are states that have foundation liaisons that can work with nonprofits, universities, and other organizations to try and identify the strategies that the state wants and approach foundations to try and get money to fund state initiatives. I know in my conversations with some foundations, they want to find ways to give money to West Virginia, whether to help with workforce issues or to diversify the economy. But if you're not proactive about it and go to them and tell them what they want, you're going to have, honestly, groups like us coming in and say, how can we help? And we'd much rather see the money go directly to West Virginia to do the projects that you want to do. So perhaps coordinating on a foundation strategy across the entire state would be a productive thing. And it can fund things like incubators and accelerators and workforce training programs and university programs that can help towards commercializing technology. All right, workforce development. Obviously, this is always a need, and the Industrial Assessment Center here is a great example of a workforce development program that has great results. So you got to try and invest in your citizens, bridge skill gaps that are going to be in demand, and develop industry partnerships to get the skills that people need. So these are just some, I don't think you can even, it's big up there. So you can see some of the jobs that exist in industrial energy efficiency. And they have fairly good wages. Some of them don't require a 4-year degree. Some of them can be certificate programs. And so we've suggested, was worked in other places like Ohio, early career-connected learning in K through 12 schools, trying to get marketable job skills that are in demand in the local economy, integrated into the K through 12 curriculum, mostly in the high school stage. But giving them work opportunities, seeing that they could see themselves working in jobs in the state, retain that talent, get them certificates by the time they graduate from high school or very close to after they graduate from high school, and perhaps have experience working with local industry that might hire them. And they don't have to get a 4-year degree, can work for a while and go get one if they want to later. And then just having facilitation, if you want to develop an industry, you got to understand where the jobs are going to be at and who's going to hire those types of people, and try and get partnerships together that really align the broader industry with the workforce training programs to ensure there's, one, the applicable job skills that are going to be in demand, and that training outcomes are consistent across the state. If there's jobs there, if you want to take one program and implement it across multiple community colleges, you better make sure the outcomes are consistent, or the students from one area are going to have an advantage over the others. This is an issue in places like Illinois. They have consistent training programs but inconsistent outcomes. So it's something that's very important to make sure you spread out the opportunity to as many people as possible. All right, access to capital. This is a really tough one for West Virginia. There's not a lot of venture capital flowing into the state, and I know that right now there's an attempt to try and build a venture fund. I think there's one that's around under $2 million right now, and they want to get one that's as big as $25 million, which would be great. But if you want to start a business, you got to know you can get access to money to actually grow your business. And there are some tough areas, the valleys of death for businesses when they're trying to commercialize their technology, that if they don't get access to either non-dilutive capital like grants and low-cost loans or venture capital or other investments, they just can't they can't make it. They have to prove out their technology and get it into the market. So one thing that some states have done, and also countries like the UK and Australia have done, is capital gains tax exemption. West Virginia has a relatively high capital gains tax, 6.5%. Some states have 0, and it makes it very easy for investors to put money in because they have no risk. But if you want to drive venture capital or other investment capital into businesses in the state, you can incentivize them by saying, if you leave your money in these companies between 3 and 10 years, we'll make you pay no capital gains tax. So that lowers their risk and can incentivize them to put their money into local companies. Another thing that doesn't require any policy whatsoever is creating coaching programs to make sure that businesses are ready to approach investors and how to ask for money and how to make sure they have good cases for growing their business and attracting investor capital. Bringing venture capitalists to the state is another issue. It's not high on their radar to say, hey, we're going to go to West Virginia and wander around and see what kind of businesses we're going to find. You got to really bring people together, and perhaps through competitions or other types of events, you can try and get a mass of West Virginia startups in front of venture capitalists to try and get them exposure and hopefully attract some money. So there's also non-legislative solutions, such as I just mentioned, but joining a regional energy efficiency organization, 98% or 96% of the country has joined a regional energy efficiency organization. Kentucky's joined 2. You can see West Virginia's in the middle of 3 different ones, so you could have a really fancy striped state in this map if you joined all 3. But they do things like provide training programs, share best practices, and also have good policy advocacy for the industry. So also establishing an industry association around the technology to try and make sure that there's some sort of advocacy arm to develop it and make sure that policies favor the development of the industry can be very helpful. West Virginia is not short of industry associations. As I saw at the Governor's Energy Summit, there's one for everything, and they're pretty effective at driving investment or driving policy for their constituents. So something focused on industrial energy efficiency, businesses and services could be helpful to drive new business growth and job growth. So as we've been talking about West Virginia's kind of opportunities in advanced energy, industrial energy efficiency is just the technology we focused on for our report. We thought it wasn't politically divisive. We thought that it had a good chance to grow jobs, but it's not the only thing in the energy space that can grow jobs. As we've heard earlier, carbon fiber reinforced plastics and trying to find other things to do with fossil fuels than burn them, create them into products that have higher value or extract rare earth minerals. Those are all things that could create jobs and that West Virginia could have a comparative advantage in doing, which would give them an advantage over other states. So the goal is to try and identify high growth industries. There are plenty of forecasts on what's going to be in demand in the future. Try and identify those and leverage your legacy industries. Don't necessarily try and build anything from scratch. That's typically a losing strategy. You want to take your existing skills base, your existing industry base, and leverage that into the industries of the future. Also, create an ecosystem that drives innovation. It was said multiple times at the Energy Summit that we need to foster an entrepreneurial spirit. But for anybody to want to start a business, you have to create an environment that makes them feel like they have a chance to actually be successful. So anything you can do to drive commercialization, incubate companies, accelerate them, provide them services, get them access to capital, that's going to help them want to set up their business here and locate it here. And then lastly, train your workers with the skills for the future and try and find ways to get to them as early as possible so you can get them into jobs earlier and have them see themselves as having a career in West Virginia so you can retain your talent. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions if anybody has any. Sure. In the energy plan, the manufacturing investment tax credit is one policy from our report that is in there. We think that'd be a really good driver. Also, there's some qualified, it's a CQEB, the Qualified Energy Conservation Bonds, is one that needs, I think, would be very good for the state. And also the LEAP financing. To finance energy efficiency. For some reason, and it's been talking about this, that hasn't been able to pass in the state, and it seems like a no-brainer when you can just open up private capital to drive investments in energy efficiency. That's going to create jobs. It's going to bring money into the state. I think that's something that if any of you have time to go comment on the energy plan, make sure you say that this is something that the state needs. And yes. So, I should have defined that because there are plenty of people who have different definitions of advanced energy. So it's kind of the broader new energy technologies. Anything that reduces energy consumption, so efficiency, anything that reduces embodied energy in products, so processes and also industrial energy efficiency processes, or anything that produces low or no greenhouse gas emitting energy. So everything from wind and solar to advanced lightweight materials to lightweight vehicles, batteries, photonics technologies, high efficiency motors, drives, pumps, insulation, things like that. It's very broad.
Who wrote the state energy plan?
The Office of Energy, West Virginia's Office of Energy. And so that's out for comment through the end of this month. And then likely they'll put some of those ideas into the next legislative session in January. The Public Energy Authority? The Utility Commission? Or?
West Virginia Public Energy Authority.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm familiar with the Public Energy Authority. Sorry. To be clear, we had no role in actually writing anything in the plan. They referenced us as a resource for some of the ideas they put into the plan. So our group doesn't do any advocacy whatsoever. We're strictly in a role of presenting ideas that are backed up by data. All right. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much. Take my water.
All right, it's the dreaded post-lunch session. I haven't had a chance to welcome you all today. My name is Shanda Minnie. I'm the Executive Director of the Appalachian Stewardship Foundation. So on behalf of the foundation, we are very happy to be here today and working with Jamie in the center to present a lot of these ideas and get a lot of discussion moving forward today and hopefully move us as a state along a track that's more beneficial to us all. Our next speaker this afternoon, Mark Wenzler, is with the National Parks Conservation Association, which, as you heard, was one of the founding organizations responsible for the founding of my foundation. So that's an interesting connection we have. Mark is the Senior Vice President for Conservation Programs at the National Parks Conservation Association. He has a long history background in environmental work, beginning with legal work as an environmental lawyer, moving into policy work, and I believe been with NPCA for over 10 years now. So please welcome me and join me in welcoming him. He's going to give us some insight into, can we do it all? Can we combine conservation, energy development, and be successful?
The answer is yes, by the way. If you want to skip ahead to the conclusion. You all ready for another PowerPoint? That is not an actual park ranger hat, by the way, but it's the best I could find. So, so I'm Mark Wenzler with NPCA. So who is NPCA? Thank you, Shannon. I think you described this a little bit, but we're the oldest national parks advocacy organization in the country, and maybe the only one that works on a national scale. We were founded just a couple of years after the Park Service was established in 1916. So those of you who follow national parks know that the park system, the Park Service, just celebrated their centennial last year. We're about to celebrate our centennial in about a year and a half. And there's our mission: protect and enhance America's national park system for present and, ooh, got cut off, future generations, it should say. I oversee our conservation work, which includes everything from air quality, climate change, wildlife protection, water issues, and just landscape protection. And I think probably when I look out across all the work that I do and my teams do, it intersects with energy in so many different ways, because we have so many externalities, whether it's air pollution, water impacts, and landscape impacts. We have a lot of fragmentation of landscapes happening, especially in the West. And we heard about some of the pipeline issues earlier today, too, with the Appalachian Trail, the Blue Ridge Parkway, a number of parks that would be impacted. So, energy versus conservation. A lot of people try to pit them against each other. I think President Obama said it best. Sometimes people try to pose conservation against energy development. We know who one of those people is. Our current president, who I think has a very different view of energy, and that perceives conservation as in conflict with energy development, and I think is pursuing an agenda that's very much trying to sweep away a lot of the conservation protections that we worked to secure over the last 8 years, and even some going back before that. So it's an unfortunate moment, because that's not where the conversation should be happening. It should be happening around how we can have both. So this is I think that's the New River Gorge on the screen there. You know, West Virginia is blessed with so many great national park sites, and it's such an important part of the West Virginia economy. These statistics are courtesy of the Outdoor Industry Association. They have them for every state. These are for West Virginia. You know, in addition to the New River, the Gauley River, you know, there's so many park sites in the state. There's even a coal heritage national area in West Virginia, which is administered by the National Park Service. So, you know, what President Trump calls job-killing regulations really include a whole host of measures that protect clean air, water, wildlife habitat, and healthy landscapes that support outdoor recreation and tourism. You know, his administration is targeting all of these measures through executive orders and regulatory rollbacks. That's probably what we spend most of our time on right now, is trying to stop that. And, you know, starting with trying to have a conversation. I can say that there are a few folks in the administration who we've been able to have conversations with about how to develop energy resources and how to protect places that we care about, national parks and lands of high recreational value and ecological value. So we see the West Virginia numbers there. For the entire U.S. economy, outdoor recreation contributes $730 billion annually, supports 6.5 million jobs, and generates $88 billion in state and federal taxes. You know, you can see the jobs number here for West Virginia, 91,000 direct outdoor recreation jobs. And I think we heard earlier from Professor McGinley that contrasts with about 20,000 right now in the coal industry in state. And unlike the boom and bust cycles that we sometimes see with the energy economy, the outdoor recreation economy continues to grow even through recession. So it's a source of great stability for many places. I think states that have really invested in their outdoor recreation economies have seen that, and it's been a real stabilizing force for them. So the idea that protecting air and water kills jobs is really a roundly discredited myth. You can go on EPA's website even today, it's still up there, and see that between 1970 and 2011, air pollution dropped 68%, while the US GDP grew 212%, and total private sector jobs increased by 88%. So we had clean air, and our economy did really well. The benefits of clean air regulations exceed cost by a factor of 30 to 1. Protecting healthy watersheds also has similar types of economic benefits. I think one statistic EPA uses is that protecting a healthy watershed costs about a tenth as much as it costs to build a water treatment plant if you haven't protected that watershed. So there's a strong economic case to be made for a strong regulatory framework that protects our air, lands, water from the impacts associated with fossil fuels. And I'll talk about some of those impacts going through the next few slides. So degraded air is a big problem. You know, for most of my 30 years as an environmental lawyer, I've been dealing with the impacts of air pollution on national parks, and it's mostly from antiquated coal-fired power plants that haven't been retrofitted or upgraded. The good news is the Clean Air Act is working, and we're starting to make progress. You see here, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, you know, sort of a scene from 1990 when the haze pollution was much, much greater, and then just from a few years ago. So the Clean Air Act is working. Those emissions are being cleaned up. These beautiful places that we love to go are looking a lot better. But, you know, just as we're cleaning up coal emissions, we have, you know, gas is really on the ascent, and it has its own host of impacts. We're seeing both conventional pollution impacts like with coal plants, but also methane, one of the most powerful greenhouse gases. This is a photo from NASA that actually detected a huge methane plume over the Four Corners area of the Southwest, which is one of the most highly concentrated areas of oil and gas development in the country. So we can see we're sort of fixing the problem on one side, but we're not fixing it on the other. And I can tell you that the methane control regulations by both EPA and the Bureau of Land Management were some of the first that were targeted by this Congress and administration. We're still fighting those battles right now. So, you know, what do? We can protect air and climate, and it can be something that both industry and environmentalists agree to. You know, my organization and the Sierra Club were involved in a more than a decade-long fight to clean up the TVA coal plants that were polluting Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was a huge fight, went on for a long time, but at the end of the day, in 2011, TVA agreed to one of the largest pollution reduction legal agreements in the nation's history. That involved reducing pollution at 59 coal-fired power plants, that's 92% of its coal fleet, phasing out 18 coal plants by no later than 2018. I think they've actually beat that schedule. And investing $350 million in additional air pollution reduction projects over 5 years in Alabama, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Now, what's remarkable about this case is that TVA not only embraced this settlement, but they built on it to drive a major shift towards cleaner energy. And you can see here how their portfolio is evolving from 58% coal 10 years ago to on target to bringing that down to 18%, 10 years from now. That's a major, major transformation, and this goes well beyond anything that came out of the legal case that we had. You know, it's interesting, you fight so long with the company in court and you expect that there might be a lot of bad feelings afterwards, but the president of TVA wrote to NPCA right after we settled the case, and I'll just quote from his letter. He says, "These agreements will help TVA achieve its goal of becoming one of the nation's leading providers of low-cost and cleaner energy. I'm writing to personally thank you for your efforts in making this happen. Your hard work and collaborative assistance were instrumental in this significant accomplishment." So that, we all felt really good about that. You know, the fight was over and we're all moving forward, and we're so proud of what TVA is doing. It's a really model for, I think, what a lot of utilities could be doing. What's really great, too, is that we've seen as TVA has cleaned up its fleet, air pollution in Great Smoky Mountains National Park has gone down significantly. This graph here tracks sort of the haziest air pollution days that the Smokies experience. You can see from 1998 to 2009, it just dropped precipitously as those coal plants were shut down and others were cleaned up. So another one of the externalities that we see is degraded landscapes. Going back again to the impacts from coal-fired power plants, we all know that acid rain was just an enormous, enormous problem in this region for so many decades. You can see sort of an example of some of the damage there. But again, the Clean Air Act worked. The 1990 amendments, the acid rain amendments, and many other programs that came later really had a big impact. And we're well on our way to recovery on the acid rain program. It's going to take decades more for a lot of these soils and ecosystems to fully recover, but they're on the right trajectory. we're seeing a very different kind of landscape degradation now with the oil and gas industry. And a lot of it has to do with just the massive footprint that this industry can have in some places. Particularly out in the Southwest, in parts of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, you see this kind of development happening, throughout the landscapes. And this is a problem when this happens right up against the borders of national parks and other protected lands. It cuts off habitat for wildlife. It introduces the possibility of air and water pollution into the national parks. And it really, a lot of times the recreation that happens in a national park is really happening in the communities outside the park. So, and really it harms those recreation economies as well. People don't want to come to a place like this to go mountain biking, to go hunting or fishing. It really changes the very character of the places. But that doesn't have to be that way. One of the things that we worked on with the last administration was trying to come up with a new way to plan ahead for oil and gas development, not to let it get out of hand before it's too late. There was a situation in Utah at the end of the Bush administration where there was, several hundred oil and gas leases were about to be let right next to Canyonlands National Park, and there was a huge outcry. And it led to a new way of approaching the issue. When the Obama folks came in, they developed a thing called the Master Leasing Plan. It's a way to sort of get everybody to the table, sit down together, and work out where do we want to drill, where should we not drill. And so the area sort of in the pink is the Master Leasing Plan boundary. You can see Canyonlands on one side, Arches on the other. And people sat down for more than a year. And this isn't just the environmental community. These are local businesses, the recreation groups, hunters and anglers, the local governments, and the energy industry. They sat down, they had all these maps, they went through this stuff for a really long time, and they came up with a plan that everybody felt really good about. It allowed for energy development, oil and gas development in that landscape, but kept it away from the places that people were concerned about, the places that would impair the recreational uses, that would be areas that are of high ecological value. And I think that was a model that we really thought was great. We started to work on other master leasing plans throughout the region, but unfortunately that is also one of the new tools, conservation tools, that is being targeted by this administration. They haven't officially gotten rid of that one yet, but we see a lot of challenges, and we're in there every day trying to persuade them that if you want more assurance of developing oil and gas resources, you need a tool like this, because you know what? Nobody litigated this plan. It came out, it's not been litigated. Everybody's good about it. Pretty much every other oil and gas lease that's let, there's a lawsuit, and it's held up in court, sometimes forever. And so there's no assurance when you do this unplanned kind of development that you're actually going to be able to develop, because a lot of it gets held up. This one didn't. This is the approach we should be taking. Degraded water is also, a big issue. We all know about the legacy of coal ash ponds. I know it's a big issue here in West Virginia and in the region and generally. I think some of the coal ash pond breaches in the last several years were very high profile. It really raised awareness about the problem. And that's the problem we're still dealing with. But in gas, we've got similar issues with fracking water. It takes sometimes over 1 million gallons to frack a well, and that is often mixed with sand and chemicals. And that stuff is then brought back up to the surface and stored in these retention ponds, much the way coal ash is, and they're not always managed very well. So, we're keeping a close eye on that as well. But unfortunately, again, we're in a regulatory environment right now where, we have a government that is trying to get rid of, reasonable ways to manage this kind of issue as opposed to thinking about how it should be managed properly. But again, it doesn't have to be that way. One of the things that we worked on at NPC over the last 8 years was trying to protect the headwaters of the Big South Fork National Recreation Area in Tennessee. Just incredibly beautiful area. It's an enormously important part of the economy for that region. People hunt and fish and paddle there. It's really, one of the gems for Tennessee, and it's supported by pretty much everyone. They all want to protect that resource. So it was the Republican governor of Tennessee and the Republican Senator Lamar Alexander, who supported a petition to the Federal Office of Surface Mining to declare those headwaters that feed that resource off limits to mining. They didn't want that area to be mountaintop mined and have all of that pollution head downstream and destroy that recreational resource. So they petitioned. Again, it took probably close to 10 years, but the Office of Surface Mining finally approved that petition just before the end of the Obama administration. So luckily we got that one done. I doubt very much that would be approved by the current administration. But that's an example, again, of this is not a political issue. These were Republicans in Tennessee who wanted to protect this resource, and there's a good tool that allowed them to do that. And I think those are the kind of tools that we need to use a little bit more. So just in conclusion, there's so many great resources here in West Virginia. I know it's a place that's near and dear to my heart. I spend most of my recreational dollars here in state, even though I'm from DC, whether it's skiing, backpacking, paddling, you name it, mountain biking, drinking beer in Davis, at Stumptown Ales. That all brings money, And there are towns throughout the United States that realize the economic benefits of places like that and realize that that just doesn't happen by accident. You've got to have a lot of protected land. Todd, you know that Canaan Valley is such a special place because there's so much protected land, national forests, wildlife refuge, state parks. It's a really rich and protected areas, and that's, we can't let those places be degraded. There is a way to develop energy resources and not degrade those places, but it takes regulation, it takes collaboration, it takes people having a conversation together, and we're hoping that we can continue to do that, but we're ready to fight to prevent rollbacks where we have to. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? How are we doing on time? Yeah. All right. Enjoy your dessert. Thanks, everyone.